The two dogs hit the ends of their leashes at the very same second, and Sandra Lowe almost went down hard on the loose gravel. 6:15 in the morning, still grey, still cold, the fog sitting low across Route 11 outside Keller Falls, and Pepper and Biscuit had planted themselves like something had turned their bones to stone. A dark blue pickup, crooked off the road 20 yards ahead. Engine off. No hazards. Something wrong. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments what part of the world you're listening from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss a story like this one. They were barking hard. Not the loose, distracted bark of a squirrel in the brush, not the show bark that Biscuit put on for the mailman when he was in a mood. This was the tight, fixed, low-throated bark that said something is wrong, and it is wrong right there. Sandra wrapped the double leash twice around her fist and let the dogs draw her forward, because whatever they had found, she was going to find it too. She had been a nurse for 22 years before her knees quit, and old habits still ran the front of her head. Move to the trouble, not away. The truck was a Ford. Older, maybe a 1998 or 99, the blue faded to something closer to grey on the hood. Right rear tire pushed into the frost-stiff weeds. A church parking lot sticker peeled up on the corner of the back window. She could see her breath now, and she could see the shape of a man behind the wheel, tipped sideways. She pressed her palm flat against the driver's window. The heat of her hand smeared a print onto the glass, and through it she saw him clearly. Older, heavy, a faded green work jacket. His mouth was open a little. His left hand was still curled loose on the steering wheel, and his right hand had fallen into his lap. His eyes were closed. His chest was moving, but only barely, like someone rowing a boat with one broken oar. Sandra dialed 911 with her thumb, one hand still holding the leashes, the phone pinned against her ear with her shoulder the way you learn to do when you have hands full and no time to put anything down. She kept her palm flat on the glass while she talked, as if she could hold him in the seat through the window, as if she could push warm across cold and keep him there another 5 minutes. The dispatcher was calm, and she was calm back. Route 11, mile marker 84, dark blue pickup, older male, unresponsive but breathing, no crash, engine cold. Yes, she was staying. She was not moving. Please hurry. Pepper had gone quiet the moment she started talking. The way he did when he understood the voice was the important thing. Biscuit still let out one throat sound every few seconds, small and worried. Sandra rested her forehead against the window for a beat and told the man on the other side of the glass her name. Deputy Craig Morse came in 5 minutes and 40 seconds, and Sandra knew because she had been counting. She always counted. It was another old habit, from nights on the ward when they were waiting for a code cart. The count let her measure herself against her own fear. 5 minutes and 40 seconds was fast. Nothing in Keller Falls had ever come to Sandra Lowe in 5 minutes and 40 seconds. Greg was 31, tall, with a face that was still boyish along the jaw and older around the eyes. He and Sandra knew each other well enough to skip hello. He popped the door lock with the tool from his belt and caught the man against his shoulder before the whole weight of him could slide out onto the ground, eased him back into the seat, slid a hand around behind his neck to keep the head straight, reached for the wallet in the chest pocket without looking down because he was watching the man's face. Ernest Naylor, 68 years old, an address on Elm Grove Road, out toward the county line. A folded piece of paper behind the license with a phone number written in blue pen and the word Brenda under it. Greg said the phrase into his radio without changing pitch. Stroke protocol, priority 1, no sirens on approach. We do not want him startled, just speed. He took Ernest's left hand and squeezed the fingers, and the fingers did not squeeze back. He tried the right hand and got a small, delayed grip. He said, Mr. Naylor, you stay with me. Squeeze if you can hear me. Nod if you can hear me. Nothing at first, and then a tiny movement of the chin that could have been the neck settling. Craig took it as a nod anyway. He talked to the man the whole time, low and gentle, the way he had learned to talk to horses when he was a boy on his uncle's place in Tennessee. The ambulance came. 2 medics from the Keller Falls fire station, one of them a woman with a red braid down her back, who Sandra had trained herself years back, when she was still teaching part-time at the community college. The woman with the braid nodded at Sandra and started her work. An oxygen mask went over Ernest's face. Someone found a vein in his right arm. Someone else was writing on a clipboard while she talked into her handset, throwing numbers to the emergency room at Keller Falls Regional. For a moment, the whole scene organized itself into something that felt almost calm. The flashing red and blue on the frosted weeds, the practiced hands, the sense that the worst was being managed. Sandra let her shoulders drop half an inch. Pepper stopped barking. She reached down without looking and rested her fingers on the top of his head. The trouble had been named. The trouble was being handled. She would go home. She would sit down. She would maybe cry a little in the kitchen where nobody could see her. Then Pepper started again. A different direction. He had moved. He was at the rear passenger door now, standing up straight and rigid, tail down, nose working against the gap where the door met the frame. He did not bark loud. He barked hard. There is a difference. Biscuit joined him without hesitation, and Biscuit never joined Pepper without being certain, because Biscuit was the older dog and lived by the rule that a good dog does not waste his own voice. Sandra looked at Craig. Craig was already crossing the gravel. His hand was on the door handle before she had finished turning her head. She did not say a word. She did not have to. He opened the back door, slow, and the yellow dome light came on inside the cab and painted a small circle of warm across a denim jacket wadded up on the back bench seat. For half a second, it looked like nothing. A jacket, an old man's jacket, thrown down because he was warm. Then the jacket moved. Craig sank down onto one knee on the running board and eased the collar of the jacket back with 2 fingers. Under it was a boy. He was 8 years old, and he was small for 8, and his dark hair was matted flat against his forehead, where he had been lying with his cheek pressed into the seat. His eyes were open. His eyes were swollen to slits from crying so long and so quiet that his body had run out of the water to make more tears with. He looked up at Craig without blinking, and he did not say anything, and he did not move. Craig's mouth opened, and then it closed. He put out his hand, palm up, and let it hang there in the air above the boy, offering. He waited. "Hey there, buddy," he said, and his voice had gone very soft. "I'm Craig. What's your name?" The boy's lower lip did the small, tight tremble that comes before speech in a child who has been holding still for a long time. He looked past Craig at the empty driver's seat, and his face did something that Sandra would remember for the rest of her life. It was the face of a person who had just remembered that the world had ended a while ago and had been waiting patiently for someone to come and confirm it. "Charlie," the boy said very quietly, "my name is Charlie Naylor. Is my grandpa dead?" Sandra put her hand over her mouth. She had watched people die in beds and on tables, and once on a sidewalk under a snow that would not stop, and she had held together every time, because that was the job. She was not going to hold together for this. She turned her face away from the truck and toward the fog, and she let her breathing go out in one long, uneven push. "No, sir," Craig said. "No, sir. Your grandpa is not dead. Your grandpa is right up front there, and the doctors are with him, and they are going to take him to the hospital right now, and they are going to try their very best, okay? Do you want to say hi to him before he goes?" Charlie thought about it, then he shook his head, one tight, small shake. "He couldn't hear me before," he said. Craig's throat moved. He nodded like he understood, because he did. He put both hands under the boy and lifted him out of the truck the way you lift something that could break if you looked at it wrong. Charlie put his arms around Craig's neck without thinking about it, and buried his face in the deputy's shoulder and did not look back at the front seat as they carried him past it. Sandra walked to meet them. She did not know what she was going to say. she said what came out. "I have dogs," she said. "This is Pepper and this is Biscuit. Do you like dogs?" Charlie turned his head just enough to look. Pepper sat down immediately because Pepper had known since he was 6 months old that when a small person was scared, he was to sit down and lower his head and become no threat at all. Biscuit did not sit. Biscuit walked up to the deputy's boot and pressed his broad brown side against Charlie's dangling foot and made the low chest hum he only ever made when he loved something. Charlie's fingers came out of Craig's collar and dropped down, and he touched the top of Biscuit's head. He did not say anything, but he did not pull his hand away either. The medics were sliding Ernest onto a backboard. The paramedic with the red braid caught Sandra's eye and gave her a small, hard nod. He is alive. He is going. He might make it. The ambulance rolled off with its lights spinning and no siren, because a siren close in a small ear could sometimes finish what a stroke had started. Craig set Charlie down on the lowered tailgate of the pickup and sat down next to him with an arm loose around the boy's back. Sandra stayed close with the dogs. The three of them sat there together in the grey fog on the shoulder of Route 11, and nobody said anything for a while, because there was nothing yet to say. Then Charlie said very small, "He told me to stay under the coat and not make a sound no matter what." Craig looked over at Sandra. Sandra looked at Craig. Neither of them moved. "Who told you that, honey?" Sandra asked. "Grandpa," Charlie said. "Before." "Before what, sweetheart?" Charlie's eyes were on the road, on the empty spot where the ambulance had been. "Before we left the house," he said. "He said if anybody looked in the truck, I was supposed to stay under and not breathe out loud. He said it was very important." Sandra felt the cold on the back of her neck, as if the fog had suddenly decided to reach for her. She looked at Craig again. Craig did not look at her this time. Craig was looking down at the top of Charlie's head, and his jaw had gone hard. "Charlie," he said, in the same soft voice he had been using since he had opened the door, "where were you and your grandpa going this morning?" Charlie was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Sandra thought maybe he had not heard. "Away," Charlie said. "We were going away." Craig nodded slowly. He rubbed a slow circle on the boy's back with the palm of his hand. "Away from where, buddy?" Charlie closed his eyes and pressed his face against the deputy's arm and did not answer. Sandra reached out and set her fingertips lightly on his knee. She did not push. Some questions had answers and some had to wait, and she had learned, in 22 years of nights on a ward, the difference. They got Charlie into Craig's cruiser, wrapped in the emergency blanket from the trunk, with a bottle of water pressed into his hands. Sandra called her husband, Dean, and told him not to worry when she was late, and told him she was going to the hospital, and told him she loved him, and hung up before he could ask. She put Pepper and Biscuit in the back seat of Craig's cruiser too, because Charlie would not let go of Biscuit's collar, and Craig did not have it in him to make an 8-year-old boy let go of a dog on a morning like this one. The four of them drove into town under the low sun that had finally started to burn the fog off. At Keller Falls Regional, the emergency room let Sandra walk the dogs in through the ambulance bay, which was against every rule they had, because the head nurse on the day shift was a woman named Marla Duncan, who had trained under Sandra in 1999 and would have carried the dogs on her back if Sandra had asked her to. Charlie sat in a plastic chair in the family room, with Biscuit's head across his lap and Pepper pressed against his ankle, and he did not cry, and he did not sleep, and he did not speak. He watched the door. Brenda Naylor got there at 1:23 in the afternoon. Sandra had called the number in Ernest's wallet at 6:50 and left a message, and then Craig had called at 7:15 from an official number, and then the hospital had called at 7:40, and Brenda had thrown a bag into the passenger seat of her Honda and driven from Asheville in 3 hours flat, which was not a thing you were supposed to do on that road, even with no traffic. She came through the double doors of the family waiting room like a woman moving underwater. Her hair was pulled back in a low tail, and her makeup had been half wiped off at some point during the drive, so that one eye had a smudge of mascara under it. She stopped inside the door. She saw Charlie. Charlie saw her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Sandra watched the woman's face and understood that Brenda Naylor had been rehearsing this scene for years, in the way that certain kinds of mothers rehearse the worst call, so that when it comes, they can be the person their child needs them to be. Brenda crossed the room in 5 long steps and dropped to her knees in front of the plastic chair and gathered her son into her chest, the way you gather up something you thought you were never going to hold again. Charlie let her. He did not cry. His hands opened and closed against the back of her jacket, small, patting the way a baby pats. Then Brenda looked up over her son's head at Sandra. Her eyes went to the dogs, to the leashes still looped around Sandra's fist, to the running clothes under the borrowed lab coat that Marla Duncan had put over Sandra's shoulders somewhere along the way. "How did you know to stop?" she said. Sandra opened her mouth. Nothing came. She looked down at the dogs and shook her head slowly. "I didn't," she said. "They did." Brenda closed her eyes, held her boy tighter, whispered something into the crown of his head that Sandra did not hear and did not need to. That was the end of the first day. Ernest lived. That was the headline, and Sandra held to it in the days that followed, because there were plenty of smaller pieces of news that would have been harder to carry alone. He lost some grip strength in his left hand. His left leg dragged a little when they got him up to walk, though the physical therapist told Brenda that most of that would come back if Ernest was willing to work for it, and Ernest, when he could talk again, told the physical therapist that he had never in his life not been willing to work for something, and she should try not to insult him. He was in the hospital for 11 days. Sandra visited on 8 of them. She told herself, the first time she drove up to the front doors with the dogs in the back seat, that she was just going to check in. She told herself the second time that Marla Duncan had asked her to. By the 4th day, she stopped explaining it to herself. She brought the dogs because Charlie would not eat in the cafeteria unless Biscuit was under the table, and Biscuit was not the sort of dog you left in a hot car in July. It was on the 3rd visit that Brenda came out into the parking lot to smoke a cigarette she did not really want, and Sandra followed her, and Brenda told her the first piece of what Sandra had already begun to suspect. Charlie's father is named Kyle Rennert, Brenda said. She said the name the way you say the name of an illness you have finally been diagnosed with. We separated last October. The divorce is not final. His family is from up around the county line, out past your side, out toward where my dad lives. They have money, not a lot, but enough to make people polite to them. Kyle has a temper. Charlie has not lived with him since the separation. Charlie has been with me in Asheville, and every other weekend he was supposed to be with my father, my dad, at the house on Elm Grove. That was the arrangement. She took a pull on the cigarette without inhaling. She was doing it for the shape of it, Sandra realized, not the smoke. Every other weekend, Kyle would drive down to Asheville to pick Charlie up. He's supposed to have every other weekend too. He gets him from Friday night to Sunday afternoon. That was the court order. But he never had Charlie at his own place. He would always take Charlie up to Elm Grove and dump him with my father for the 2 days. Then he would come by on Sunday and collect him and drive him home. And Kyle would pretend on Sunday that Charlie had been with him the whole time. Brenda gave a small, dry sound that was not a laugh. My dad played along, because my dad thought that the alternative was worse. Was it? Sandra asked. Brenda looked at her cigarette. It was until it wasn't, she said. Sandra waited. 2 weeks ago, Brenda went on, Kyle told my dad on a Sunday that he was taking Charlie with him for the whole next month, that the court had said so. My dad asked to see the paper. Kyle did not have a paper. My dad said no, and Kyle left, And Charlie went back to Asheville with me on Monday, and that seemed like the end of it. On Thursday night, my father called me. Kyle had been out at the house that afternoon, not with Charlie, just Kyle, and he had said some things. My dad would not tell me what. He just said over the phone that he thought maybe he should come get Charlie for the weekend himself. Come down to Asheville and pick him up, drive him back to his own house, keep him for a few days, maybe more than a few days. He said the word maybe. He never used to use that word about his grandson. And this morning was Friday morning. He drove down at 4 in the morning. He was supposed to text me when he got Charlie. He didn't. That is why I already had my bag packed when the hospital called. Sandra was quiet for a long time. Down at the end of the parking lot, a maple was starting to think about turning, one branch of it already going the color of a peach. "Brenda," she said finally, "I have to tell you something," Charlie said, right after we got him out of the truck. "He said your father told him to stay under the coat and not make a sound if anyone looked in the truck." Brenda's face did not move. She had already known. Sandra saw it. She had already been working through what it meant. "Kyle followed him," Brenda said. "Kyle followed my father from Asheville, or Kyle was already watching the highway. That is what my father was worried about. That is why he had Charlie hidden." "Do you think Kyle knew Charlie was in the truck?" "I don't know." "Do you think Kyle is going to come here?" Brenda ground the cigarette out on the sole of her shoe carefully and dropped the butt into her pocket. "Yes," she said. "I think he's going to come here." He came at 4:10 that afternoon. Sandra was in the waiting room with Charlie and the dogs, watching a cooking show with the sound off. Brenda had gone up to Ernest's room to sit for an hour and take a shift. Marla Duncan was at the nurse's station with her back to the door, entering a chart, and she was the one who saw him first, because Marla had been a nurse for 20 years and knew every kind of walk a person could bring through the door of an emergency waiting room. She saw the walk of Kyle Rennert, 6'2", thick through the shoulders, a shaved head under a black cap, a khaki jacket zipped up against the air conditioning, even though it was 70 degrees in the lobby. He did not walk with anger, not on the surface. He walked with something worse. He walked with certainty. He was here to collect a thing that was his. "Excuse me, sir," Marla said, stepping around the counter. "May I help you find someone?" He did not look at her. He looked past her, at the waiting room, at the plastic chairs. His eyes went to the top of Charlie's dark head over the back of the chair. Charlie did not know he was there. Charlie was watching a woman on the television make a very tall sandwich. "That's my son," Kyle Rennert said. "I'm taking him home." Sandra stood up, slow. She stepped between Kyle and the chair, and she moved without thinking. Pepper stood up too. Biscuit slid off the chair and put his front paws on the floor and pushed his broad chest into position in front of Charlie's knees. The low chest hum was gone. What replaced it was not a growl exactly. It was closer to a warning that a growl would come next. "Sir," Marla said, moving into his path, "I need you to step outside for a moment. Family visitation is restricted. We have to verify." "I don't need verification," Kyle said. "I'm his father." He said it without raising his voice. That was, Sandra would think later, the most frightening thing about him. Charlie turned his head at the sound. He saw his father. His face went completely still. Sandra had seen animals do this in the woods, when a bigger animal walked into the clearing. She had never seen a child do it before. Charlie did not stand up. He did not cry out. He did not reach for his mother. He simply became, in one blink, a very quiet, very small object. And then his hand came out and closed on the fur at the back of Biscuit's neck. Craig Morse came in the front door. That had not been an accident. Marla had hit the code panic behind the counter 30 seconds earlier, and Craig had been in the parking lot, which he had made a habit of over the last 3 days, because Craig was not the kind of man who left a job half done. He came in with his hand, not on his gun, but resting on the buckle of his belt, and he stopped just inside the door and made his voice friendly. "Kyle," he said. "How you doing, man? Come on out with me a minute." Kyle Rennert looked at Craig. Craig looked at Kyle. Sandra realized, watching them, that these two men had known each other since middle school, and neither one of them had ever thought highly of the other. "I'm taking my son," Kyle said again. "You can walk me out. You can walk us both out." "I can't do that today, brother," Craig said. "You know I can't. Come on, let's you and me talk in the lot for 2 minutes. That is all I am asking of you. 2 minutes. Something moved in Kyle Rennert's jaw. He looked at Charlie one more time. Charlie was staring at his own knees. Then Kyle looked at Sandra and for the first time really saw her, and his eyes went slowly down to the dogs and back up to her face. "You the lady with the dogs," he said. Sandra did not answer. "You are the reason my kid is in this hospital right now instead of home with his family," Kyle said. "I want you to think about that. His family is here," Sandra said quietly. "His mother is upstairs, his grandfather is upstairs, his grandmother is on her way from Wilmington. His family is here, sir." Kyle Rennert smiled. It was a slow, patient smile. "Ma'am," he said, "you have no idea what you are messing with." He turned and walked out with Craig on his heels. The doors slid shut behind them. Marla Duncan let out a breath she had been holding for so long that her hands were shaking when she put them down flat on the counter. Charlie began, very quietly, to cry. Biscuit turned his face and licked the tears off Charlie's cheek with the flat of his tongue, once, twice, 3 times, and then rested his big square head on Charlie's leg and did not move for the next 2 hours. Craig came back inside 40 minutes later. He was alone. He did not look pleased with himself, but he did not look defeated either. He came over to Sandra and sat down heavily in the plastic chair on her other side. "He'll be back," Craig said. "Sooner or later. He hasn't done anything technically that I can hold him for. Standing in a lobby saying he wants his kid isn't a crime. What he did to Ernest may be a crime, if it turns out he did what I think he did. But I don't have that yet. I have Charlie's word about the coat. That is not nothing. It is not enough." "What can we do?" Sandra said. Craig sat with that for a moment. He was watching Charlie, who was almost asleep against Biscuit. "Right now," he said. "Right now, we get Charlie somewhere he feels safe. Brenda cannot go back to Asheville because Asheville is where Kyle knows to look. She cannot go to Elm Grove because Elm Grove is where Kyle already went. She has to sleep somewhere tonight, and it has to be somewhere Kyle Rennert is not going to think of." Sandra nodded slowly. "Dean and I have a spare room," she said. Craig looked at her. He did not say anything for a moment. "Sandra," he said, "I did not ask you to do that. I would not ask you to do that." "I know," she said. "I am telling you I am doing it." Dean, Sandra's husband, met them at the front door of the little cedar-shingled house on Ridge Road that night, with the porch light on and a pot of chicken and rice already going in the kitchen. Dean was a retired shop teacher from the high school and looked like exactly what he was, which was a large, bearded man who had spent most of his life around teenagers and had come out of it kinder rather than harder. He did not ask any questions. He set out plates. He put a mug of hot chocolate down in front of Charlie and did not comment when Charlie only stared at it. He said, "Buddy, if you want to sleep in the room next to ours, you can. If you want to sleep on the couch with the dogs, you can do that too. Either one is fine." Charlie slept on the couch with Biscuit at his feet and Pepper on the rug beneath him, and did not wake up until the sun was already high the next morning. Brenda slept in the spare room. Sandra could hear her at 3 in the morning, crying quietly into the pillow. Sandra did not go in. Some kinds of crying you have to do alone before you can accept help with the rest of them. She lay in her own bed next to Dean, and she watched the digital clock go from 3:11 to 3:29 to 4:02, and she did not sleep either. On the fourth day after the truck on the shoulder, Craig Morse and another deputy went out with a warrant and searched Ernest Naylor's pickup where it was sitting in the county impound lot. Craig had told Brenda in advance that he was going to do it, and Brenda had said fine and had signed a piece of paper giving him leave on her father's behalf and had asked very quietly, "What are you looking for?" And Craig had said, "I don't know. That is the truth. I don't know." He found several things. He found a plastic grocery bag on the floor of the passenger side with 2 changes of clothes for Charlie, folded, and a small stuffed rabbit that was missing an eye. He found a manila envelope tucked under the driver's seat with printouts of emails between Kyle Rennett and a woman in Charlotte whose name Craig did not recognize. He found a leather notebook the size of a wallet wedged between the seat and the console, with dates going back 6 months and short entries in Ernest Naylor's slow, careful cursive. Kyle came by. Kyle called. Kyle shouted at Charlie in the driveway. Charlie asked me why his father had held his arm so hard. Charlie has a mark on his arm. I asked Charlie about the mark. Charlie will not talk about the mark, and so on. Not every day, but often enough. He found, taped inside the notebook's back cover, an unopened pharmacy envelope with Ernest's own name on it and a prescription date from 2 months ago. Blood pressure medication. Ernest had never picked it up. And in the glove box, in a small folded piece of paper labeled in the same careful cursive, he found a single sentence. "If something happens to me before I can do this properly, please make sure Charlie stays with his mother, Brenda Naylor, and not with his father, please. Ernest Naylor." Signed, dated the Wednesday before the stroke. Craig sat in the cab of the impounded truck for a long time with that piece of paper in his hand. Then he put it very carefully into an evidence bag, sealed the bag, and drove straight to the hospital. Ernest was awake by then. He was propped up on 2 pillows, and he was tired around the eyes in a new way, but the words worked when he opened his mouth. His left hand still would not do what he asked it to, and it made him angrier than the doctors would have liked. Brenda was in the chair by the window. Charlie was on the bed next to his grandfather, sitting cross-legged, showing him a picture he had drawn with the crayons that Marla Duncan had brought up from the pediatric ward. The picture was of 2 dogs sitting on gravel next to a blue truck. There was a woman with the dogs, and she had orange hair. Sandra did not, in fact, have orange hair. She had brown hair with a lot of grey in it. But she had been running that morning in an orange fleece, and Charlie had noticed the fleece. Craig knocked. Ernest looked up and lifted his good hand, and Craig came in and closed the door behind him. "I would like to talk to you and Brenda for a couple of minutes," he said. "It is about your notebook." Ernest looked at Brenda. Brenda took Charlie by the hand and stood up. "Buddy," she said, "go find Sandra. She's downstairs with the dogs. Come get me when you're hungry, okay?" Charlie nodded. He got off the bed. He paused at the door and looked back at his grandfather. Ernest lifted his good hand again and touched 2 fingers to his own forehead in the small private salute he must have given the boy 1,000 times over the last 8 years. Charlie did the same back, and then he left. Craig sat down in the chair by the window. He set the evidence bag on the tray table between them. He said quietly, "Mr. Naylor, I want you to know that I read the whole notebook. I did not want to, but I had to. I'm going to ask you some hard questions. Take your time. Nothing about what you say to me right now is going to make your grandson less safe. That is my promise." Ernest closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "He was hurting the boy," he said. His voice cracked on the word boy, and he had to try it again. "He was not hitting him where you could see. He was doing the thing where you grab someone by the arm and you squeeze until they cry, and then you tell them you were only playing. He was doing it in the driveway of my house when Brenda was not there. I saw it twice. Charlie told me about it 4 times. I told Brenda. I told her a month ago. She had already started the process to change the custody. It moves so slow. It moves so slow, Craig. He had every other weekend. Every other weekend I had a boy in my kitchen who did not want to answer the phone when his father called. Brenda had begun crying, silently. She was not looking at her father. She was looking at the floor. Last Thursday, Ernest went on, Kyle came out to my place. He said he was going to take Charlie the next weekend, whether the court had said so or not. He said if I tried to stop him, he was going to make sure I never saw the boy again. And he said it in a way that made me believe him. He said some things about Brenda that I am not going to repeat in front of my daughter. I have friends in the sheriff's office, Craig. Not you. Older men. Men I trust. I called one of them Thursday night. He told me the best thing I could do was get the boy out of the county for a few days until he could get a judge to sign a piece of paper. That is what I was doing at 4 in the morning. I was driving to a motel out past the state line. My friend was going to meet me there with the paper by Sunday. I was going to keep Charlie safe until Monday. That was the whole plan. He stopped. He looked at his own left hand where it lay on the sheet like something that had been left behind on the bed by mistake. I felt the stroke coming 10 miles out from the state line, he said. I felt something in my face go loose. I did not know what it was. I told Charlie to get down under my jacket and to be very quiet. I told him if a car pulled up next to us, he was not to move and not to make a sound. I said it in a firm voice because I did not want to scare him and I did not want him to hesitate. I pulled the truck off the road as best I could. That is the last thing I remember. That is the last thing I remember doing on my own. The room was quiet for a long time. Craig cleared his throat. He said, "Sir, everything you have just told me is going to help us. It is going to help us a lot. The notebook is going to help us. There is going to be a hearing. I have to tell you that Kyle came to the hospital on Sunday afternoon. He tried to take Charlie out of the family waiting room. He did not succeed. He was told to leave. He left. He is going to try again. Not here, not in the same way, but he is going to try. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Ernest closed his eyes. "Yes. There is a woman named Denise Furlow who is with the County Family Services office," Craig said. "She is good. She is on our side in this. She is going to want to talk to Charlie. She is going to talk to him gently. She is not going to take him anywhere. She is going to sit with him for maybe an hour. Then she is going to make a recommendation to the judge that Charlie stay with Brenda and that Kyle have no unsupervised contact until the hearing. Do I have your permission to bring her by tomorrow?" "You have my permission for anything," Ernest said. "That keeps that boy out of that man's hands." Craig nodded. He put the evidence bag back into the folder he had been carrying. He stood up. At the door, he paused. "Mr. Naylor," he said, "the reason your grandson is alive right now, and the reason a paramedic got to you in time, is a woman named Sandra Lowe and her 2 dogs. I need you to know that. When you are ready, when you are up to it, you should meet her." Ernest did not smile. He was not the sort of man who smiled easily on his best days. But his eyes went to Brenda, and Brenda nodded, and he nodded back at Craig. "I already know who she is," he said. "My grandson has told me. He drew a picture. Charlie stayed at Sandra and Dean's for the next 12 days. Brenda stayed too. Sandra pulled her own sheets off the bed in the guest room and put fresh ones on. Dean rearranged his workshop out back to make a corner for Charlie, with a small workbench and a soft foam mallet and a pile of scrap wood that Charlie could hammer into whatever shape he wanted. And Charlie spent hours out there, most days, not talking, just hammering. On the 3rd day, he hammered a piece of pine into something that was more or less the shape of a dog, and painted it brown, and gave it to Biscuit. Biscuit sniffed it thoughtfully, and then lay down next to it, and refused to let anyone move it out of the living room, and it was still on the coffee table a month later. Denise Furlow, from Family Services, came out on a Tuesday morning. She was a small woman in her 50s, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the kind of unhurried voice that made the room feel wider. She sat on the floor with Charlie for an hour and a half and asked him about crayons and about school and about the shape of Biscuit's ears. Near the end, she asked him one question about his father, and Charlie answered it in one sentence, quietly. And Denise wrote nothing down for a moment and then wrote something down, and then closed her notebook. When she stood up to leave, she took Brenda outside onto the porch. Sandra brought them each a mug of coffee. "I am recommending temporary sole custody to you with a restraining order against your husband, pending the divorce and custody hearing," Denise said. "I would like the order in place by Friday. Between now and Friday, I would like you to stay exactly where you are staying. Do not go back to Asheville yet. Do not go to the house on Elm Grove. If your husband tries to contact you, do not answer. Send all communication to your attorney or to me. If your husband tries to contact your son, dial 911 first and then me second. Do you have my card?" Brenda nodded. Her lips were pressed together. She was not crying, but she looked like a woman who had not blinked in a long time. "There is one more thing," Denise said. "Your father's notebook and what your father told the deputy is going to be a very serious piece of the picture at the hearing. But your father is 68 years old and just had a stroke. And even if he recovers well, a defense attorney is going to argue that his testimony should not be trusted. So we are going to want other pieces, doctor's records if Charlie has ever seen a doctor about a bruise, school records if a teacher ever asked about a mark, anything you have, anything you can find. We are building a wall, Brenda. Every brick counts. Do you understand?" Brenda nodded again. "I understand." Denise Furlow went home. Sandra took the mugs back inside. Dean was out in the workshop with Charlie, and through the kitchen window, Sandra could hear the small tapping of the foam mallet on wood, steady, regular, calming. "He hasn't hit him in the face," Brenda said quietly. "Not that I saw. The doctor's records will show one visit for a bump on the head that we said came from falling off a bike. That was a lie. He shoved him. He shoved a 6-year-old boy hard enough to knock him into the coffee table. I stayed with Kyle for another year after that, Sandra. I stayed a whole year. I am the reason we are in this." "You are not the reason," Sandra said, "that a grown man puts his hands on a child." "No," Brenda said, "but I am the reason I did not leave sooner." Sandra did not answer. She washed the coffee mugs. Some things are not fixed by the right sentence in the right moment. Some things get fixed slowly, over years, by a woman making her own list of amends and going down it item by item. Brenda would do that work. Sandra could see it in her already. The restraining order came through on Friday. Kyle Rennert was served at his workplace, a metal fabrication shop out past the county line, in front of his boss and 2 of his co-workers. He did not react in the moment. He signed the paper. He went back to work. That night, according to his neighbors, he sat on the steps of his front porch and drank until it was dark. And then he went inside. And then a light came on in his back bedroom. And then the light went off. And that was all anybody saw. On Saturday morning, at 4 in the morning, Sandra woke up because Pepper was standing next to her bed with his ears up. Pepper did not stand next to her bed at 4 in the morning. Pepper slept curled in a tight ball on the rag rug at Dean's side of the bed, and he did not move from that spot until Sandra came into the kitchen at 6:30 to start the coffee. Sandra sat up. She listened. Nothing. No wind. No car on the road out front. Nothing. She got out of bed and put on her robe and went barefoot into the hall. Pepper stayed at her heel. Biscuit was in the living room where he had been sleeping next to Charlie's makeshift bed on the couch, and Biscuit had his head up too. But Biscuit had not left Charlie's side because Biscuit had decided sometime in the last 2 weeks that leaving Charlie's side was not something he did anymore. Sandra went to the front window and looked out through the slats of the blinds. Their little cedar house sat on 2 acres of pasture, with the driveway curving up from Ridge Road through a stand of pines. In the moonlight, she could see the whole driveway. It was empty. Ridge Road beyond the pines was empty too. She looked longer. She almost turned away. Then she saw the truck. It was parked on the shoulder of Ridge Road, half hidden by the pines, headlights off, engine off. She could just see the top of the cab and the reflection of moonlight on the windshield. She could not see who was inside it, if anyone was inside it. It could have been there for hours. She stepped back from the window. She went into the kitchen without turning on any lights. She picked up the phone and dialed the emergency dispatch line and asked, in a low, calm voice, for Craig Morse. He was on shift. He was 10 minutes away. He came in 12. By the time he pulled his cruiser slow up the driveway with his headlights off, the truck on the shoulder was gone. There were tire marks on the gravel where somebody had turned around fast. Craig walked the length of the shoulder with a flashlight. He came back with a cigarette butt in a plastic bag, still slightly warm. "He is testing us," Craig said quietly, standing in Sandra's kitchen with the light off. "He is not going to try anything at your house tonight. He is figuring out the ground. He is figuring out how far he can push before someone stops him. I'm going to have a car sit on this driveway every night for the next 2 weeks. I need you not to move around outside after dark. I need Charlie in the interior room with no windows. I need the dogs where you can hear them." Sandra nodded. She did not tell Brenda about the truck on the shoulder. Not that morning, not until Sunday afternoon, when Brenda already suspected because she had heard Sandra on the phone and had put things together. Brenda took the news the way she took every other piece of news. She sat down at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood, and she waited a long time to speak. Then she said, "I am going to call my attorney and ask her about moving the hearing up." "She will say she can't," Sandra said. "That is not how the schedule works, but you should ask." "I will ask." The attorney's name was Rita Cho. She was a woman in her early 40s, sharp, expensive, and doing this case at half her usual rate because she and Brenda had gone to college together and because she had been waiting for years to walk into a courtroom in Kyle Reynolds County and take him apart in front of a judge. She was the best piece of luck Brenda Naylor had going for her, and she knew it, and she was going to use every bit of it. Rita said she could not move the hearing up. Rita said she could, however, file for an expanded restraining order that included Sandra Lowe's home address on Ridge Road and a follow-up motion asking the court to require Kyle to check in daily with the sheriff's office. She filed both by Monday afternoon. The judge signed the first on Tuesday and denied the second, which was more or less what Rita had expected. The next 12 days went by like the 12 days on a slow river. Every morning Sandra ran with the dogs, but she ran on the pasture behind the house now, not on Route 11, and she carried the phone in the pocket of her fleece with the emergency dial ready under her thumb. Every afternoon Brenda went to the hospital to sit with Ernest. Every evening Dean cooked. Charlie began slowly to talk more. On the 8th day he laughed at a joke Dean told about a squirrel and a garden hose, and Sandra had to leave the room because she did not want the boy to see her get emotional about a laugh. On the 10th day Ernest came home from the hospital, not to his own house on Elm Grove, which everybody agreed was still not safe for him alone, but to a small rental unit in town that Brenda's aunt had arranged, with a wide doorway and a chair with arms in the shower and a walker in the front hall. Charlie went with Brenda to see him every afternoon. Charlie began sleeping in the bedroom of the rental with his grandfather most nights, and Brenda slept on the pull-out couch in the living room. And Sandra and Dean's house went back to being a 2-person house with 2 dogs, and Sandra found herself, without meaning to, missing the sound of a boy hammering on a piece of pine in her husband's workshop. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in late September. Rita Cho spent 2 days preparing Brenda for cross-examination. She spent one afternoon preparing Charlie, gently, in a way that Denise Furlow supervised, for the possibility that a judge might want to hear him speak. She spent a full day going through Ernest's notebook page by page and cross-referencing every date to phone records that Brenda had subpoenaed. She spent an evening at Sandra and Dean's kitchen table, drinking coffee, going over Sandra's own written statement about the morning on Route 11. "Do not," Rita said to Sandra, tapping the page with her finger. "Under any circumstances, editorialize. You saw a truck. You saw a man. You saw a boy. You called for help. You are a witness. Judges love witnesses. Judges hate storytellers. Save the storytelling for your grandchildren. In the courtroom, you are a camera." "I don't have grandchildren," Sandra said, and was surprised to hear the small crack in her own voice. Rita looked up from the page. She looked at Sandra for a long moment across the table. She did not say anything. She squeezed Sandra's hand once and went back to the papers. On the Sunday before the hearing, Kyle Rennert filed his own motion. He filed it through an attorney whose name Rita did not recognize, a lawyer out of Raleigh who charged, according to Rita, about 4 times what Kyle Rennert could reasonably afford. The motion asked for immediate sole physical custody of Charlie Naylor to be granted to the father, on the grounds that the child had been effectively kidnapped by his maternal grandfather, that the mother had allowed the child to be handed off to strangers of no legal relation, that the mother had exposed the child to 2 large unlicensed dogs of unknown temperament, and that the child was currently being coached by the mother, the grandfather, and the stranger to make false accusations against a father with a spotless legal record. Rita read the motion out loud at the kitchen table on Ridge Road on Sunday night. She read it in a flat, unemotional voice, and when she got to the phrase spotless legal record, she paused and looked up at Brenda with a small, dangerous smile. "Spotless," she said. "That is a big word to use in a court filing. Let us find out how spotless." She spent Monday and Tuesday on the phone. She called a friend in the district attorney's office in Buncombe County. She called a paralegal she had trained. She called the police records office in 3 counties. On Tuesday evening, she came out to Sandra and Dean's house with a folder in her hand and a look on her face that Sandra had never seen a lawyer wear. "Kyle Rennert," Rita said, laying the folder open on the table, "has 3 sealed juvenile assault charges from between the ages of 14 and 17. Sealed. That means, at the hearing on Thursday, I cannot bring them up. But he also, at 19, took a plea deal on a domestic battery charge against a previous girlfriend in a different county that never made it to a full trial. That plea deal is not sealed. It is a public record. His attorney did not know about it because his attorney is from Raleigh and did his search based on this county and the neighboring one and did not think to look further south. I looked further south. That plea deal, ladies and gentlemen, is going to walk into that courtroom on Thursday morning like a very rude, uninvited guest." Brenda put her hand over her mouth. She did not cry. She sat perfectly still. "There is more," Rita said. 2 weeks ago, the woman in Charlotte in those emails that Deputy Morse found in the truck. I called her. She talked to me for 40 minutes. She dated Kyle Rennert briefly this spring. She has a son, 4 years old, from a previous relationship. She left Kyle after 6 weeks because of the way he treated her son. She has a written statement she is willing to sign. She is willing to travel here to give it in person if we need her to. She said, and I am quoting, "If I can help another woman get her boy out of that man's house, I will drive there myself." Sandra sat back in her chair. Dean, who had been standing at the counter with his back to them making a pot of coffee, turned around and put both hands flat on the counter and closed his eyes. Brenda finally spoke. "Rita," she said, "I want you to be careful. He is going to lose in that courtroom. And he is going to know before he loses that he is going to lose. What is he going to do on Wednesday night? Rita nodded slowly. She had already thought about that. You are not going to be at Ridge Road on Wednesday night, she said. None of you are. Not you, not Charlie, not Sandra, not Dean. You are going to be at a hotel in Asheville. I have already made the reservation. Deputy Morse knows. He is going to have a car in the parking lot of that hotel from 10 p.m. Wednesday until 7 a.m. Thursday. When you come to court on Thursday morning, you are going to come with an escort. When you leave court on Thursday, you're going to leave with an escort. I am not being dramatic. I am being careful. Sandra took a slow breath. The dogs come, she said. Rita looked at her. The dogs come to the hotel, Sandra said, and the dogs come to the courthouse. You can put them in the car in the parking lot. You can put them under my seat. I don't care. That boy sleeps with Biscuit on Wednesday night. That boy walks into that courtroom with Pepper on the sidewalk outside. That is not negotiable. Rita smiled. It was, Sandra thought, the first real smile she had seen from Rita Cho since the day she met her. Agreed, Rita said. Then, at 8:30 on Tuesday night, everything changed. The phone at the little rental unit rang. Brenda was there, sitting with Ernest and Charlie, watching a game show on the small kitchen television. She picked up the phone thinking it was Rita. It was not Rita. It was Marla Duncan. Brenda, Marla said, I am at the hospital. Your father needs to come back in. His speech is going again. It started about an hour ago. He is talking to me, and I am watching his mouth, and the left corner is dropping. Get him in the car right now. Right now, Brenda. Do you hear me? Do not call an ambulance. It will be slower than you driving. Just come. Brenda dropped the phone. She got Charlie into his shoes. She got her father to his feet with a hand under his good arm. She got them all out to the Honda in less than 4 minutes. She called Sandra from the driveway. Sandra was already turning the key in her own truck by the time Brenda hung up. Ernest had a second, smaller stroke that night. It was, the doctor told them by 2 a.m, a warning stroke, what they called a TIA, which meant a temporary interruption to blood flow that had this time resolved itself. But it meant that the first one was not the end of the story. It meant that another bigger one could come, and if it came, it might come soon, and there was no way to promise otherwise. They kept him overnight. Brenda sat in the same chair by the same window. Charlie slept curled up in the pediatric daybed that a nurse had wheeled in for him. Sandra sat outside in the hallway on a hard plastic bench, and Dean brought her a coffee at 3 a.m. and sat down next to her, and neither of them said anything for a long time. The hearing is 31 hours from now, Sandra said eventually. I know. He's not going to be able to testify. I know. Rita said the notebook is going to hold up even without him, but it would have been better with him. I know, Dean said. He put his hand over hers on the plastic bench. Sandra, we do the next thing we know how to do. That is all any of us has ever done. At 6 a.m. on Wednesday, Sandra went back to Ridge Road to pack a small bag for Charlie for the hotel that night. She brought the dogs, because the dogs were not going to be left in a car outside the hospital in September heat, and because Charlie had woken up briefly at 4:30 and asked for Biscuit, and Sandra had promised him she would bring the dogs back with her. She was in Charlie's makeshift room, the guest room she had been calling Charlie's room in her own head for 2 weeks, folding a small pair of pajamas when Pepper began to bark. Not the alert bark, not the warning bark, the other bark, the one from the shoulder of Route 11. Sandra stood very still with the pajamas in her hand. Pepper was in the front hall. She could hear his nails on the wood moving. She could hear Biscuit joining him. She could hear Biscuit begin to make the sound that was not a growl, but was the sound before the growl. Sandra set the pajamas down. She stepped out of Charlie's room into the hall. She could see the front door from where she stood. The front door was closed, the chain was on, the deadbolt was thrown, the dogs were standing shoulder to shoulder in the front hall, facing the door, with their bodies low and their ears pinned back. She heard, very quietly, the sound of the porch board that squeaked. There was a man on her porch. Sandra did not move. She did not scream. She took 2 silent steps backward into Charlie's room, closed the door behind her without letting the latch click, and picked up her phone from the dresser. She dialed Craig Morse's direct number. "Craig," she whispered, "there is someone on my porch." Craig, on the other end, went immediately from ordinary voice to work voice. "Mum, are the doors locked?" "Yes." "Where are the dogs?" "Front hall." "Where are you?" "Guest room, on the side of the house." "Sandra, I am 4 minutes out. I am telling you exactly what to do. Stay in that room. Close the closet door. Sit down inside the closet with the phone. Stay on the line. Do not, under any circumstances, come out of that closet until I am inside the house calling your name. Do you understand me?" She did what he said. She sat down on the floor of the closet in the dark and put her back against the wall and pressed the phone hard against her ear. She could hear, through the wall, the dogs. Their sound had changed again. It was no longer the sound before the growl. It was the growl. Then she heard the front door handle rattle. Then it stopped. Then a long silence. Then from the far side of the house, from the direction of the sliding glass door off the kitchen, a small crash of glass. The dogs erupted. They exploded down the hallway in a wave of noise. Sandra pressed her hand over her own mouth. Craig was still on the line. Craig was saying, "I hear it, I hear it, I hear the dogs. I'm 2 minutes out, stay where you are." 2 minutes. There was a shout, a man's shout, not a word, a sound. The sound a body makes when something 80 pounds of muscle and bone lands on it in the dark. Then a second shout, farther away, receding past the kitchen. Boots on the deck outside, boots on the gravel of the back path. A man running. Then Pepper, barking at the kitchen door. Then Biscuit, still inside, moving around the house, checking every room. Then finally the sound Sandra had been waiting for, the sound of Craig's cruiser tires spraying gravel up the driveway, the sound of a car door slamming, the sound of Craig's boots on her front porch. "Sandra," he called through the front door. "Sandra Lowe, it is Craig Morse. I'm coming in. I need you to stay in the closet until I get to you. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," she called back. He was in the house in seconds. He was in the guest room in seconds after that. He opened the closet door and reached in and helped her to her feet, and she was surprised to find that her legs were still working because she could not feel them. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." "Where is Dean?" "Hospital. With Brenda." "Charlie." "With Brenda." Craig closed his eyes for 1 long second. Then he opened them again. "Okay," he said. "Come with me. Slow. Slow." They walked out to the kitchen. The sliding glass door was open. 1 panel of glass was cracked from lower corner to middle. On the floor in front of the door was a crowbar. Next to the crowbar was a man's hunting cap, the strap broken, and next to the cap was a torn strip of denim, still with a button on it, ripped away by teeth. Biscuit came trotting in from the mudroom. He had blood on his jaw, not his own. He was walking normally. He was breathing normally. He came and stood beside Sandra and pressed his side against her leg and looked up at her, and his eyes were as calm and patient as they had always been. "Good boy," Sandra said. Her voice did not sound like her voice. "Good boy, Biscuit. Good boy." They caught Kyle Rennert 2 hours later. He had made it about half a mile through the pines behind Sandra and Dean's property before he had to stop. He was sitting on a stump when a fish and wildlife officer named Terrell Boone came across him, having been radioed in by Craig. Terrell had known Kyle since they were both in the 4th grade. Terrell was 6'4" and had once held the school record for the shot put. Terrell did not have to raise his voice. He said, "Kyle, put your hands on your head, brother, or I am going to put you on the ground, and I am not going to be gentle." Kyle put his hands on his head. He had a puncture wound on the back of his right calf, from where Biscuit had, in the dark of the kitchen, taken his one clear shot at a leg that was climbing through a broken door. He had scratches on his forearm and a torn jacket. He had, in his pocket, the small handgun that had been legally registered to him for 6 years and that he had, on Wednesday night, brought with him onto Sandra Lowe's porch. He had also, in his other pocket, a folded piece of paper. On the paper, in Kyle Rennert's own handwriting, was a list of 3 names: Brenda, Ernest, Sandra. The first 2 had lines through them. The third did not. Terrell Boone took the paper. He put it in a plastic bag. He drove Kyle Rennert to the county lockup in the front seat of his own truck, with his hand loose on the gun on his hip and his eyes on the mirror. The custody hearing did not happen on Thursday. Rita Cho called the court on Thursday morning at 8 and requested a continuance. The judge granted it without argument. The list of 3 names went into an evidence locker. Kyle Rennert was charged that afternoon with 3 felonies, including breaking and entering with intent to commit a violent felony, and with 2 additional counts related to the list in his pocket. His bail was set high enough that his family did not, in the end, post it. He sat in a cell in the county lockup in a grey jumpsuit for 6 weeks before the state got around to his first arraignment. The custody hearing, when it finally happened, was in the 2nd week of November. It lasted 40 minutes. Kyle Rennert was in a cell in the state prison in Craggy by then and could not attend. His attorney did not attend either, having withdrawn from the case 2 weeks earlier. The judge read the notebook. The judge read the emails. The judge read the statement from the woman in Charlotte. The judge read the report from the sheriff's office about the night of Wednesday, the 16th of September. The judge asked Brenda a total of 3 questions, all of which she answered without crying. The judge asked Charlie no questions at all. Charlie sat in the front row with his mother's hand on his shoulder, wearing a small navy blazer that Dean had helped him pick out at the department store in town. Sole legal and physical custody of Charlie Naylor was awarded to his mother, Brenda Naylor. All contact between Charlie and his father was to be through a court-appointed supervisor, and no contact was to occur at all while Kyle Rennert was incarcerated. The judge, before he closed the file, added 1 line to the record. He said, "For what it is worth, I believe that Mr. Naylor, the grandfather in driving north on Route 11 that morning, was acting in the best interest of the minor child, and I would like that acknowledgement to remain in the record of this proceeding." Ernest Naylor, sitting in the back row with a cane between his knees and Sandra Lowe on one side of him and his sister on the other, did not say anything. His good hand tightened on the top of the cane. His eyes closed for a moment. That was all. That night at Sandra and Dean's kitchen table, with everyone there, Brenda and Charlie and Ernest and Rita and Craig and Dean and Marla Duncan, who had brought a pie, they ate a pot roast that Dean had been cooking since 10 in the morning. Ernest could not yet cut his own meat well with a knife. Charlie stood up and cut his grandfather's meat for him and did not make a face. Ernest thanked him. Ernest told him quietly that a man who cuts another man's meat is a man to trust with anything. Charlie shrugged, but he was smiling. Biscuit lay under the table with his big head on Charlie's foot. Pepper lay on the kitchen rug and every once in a while opened one eye and looked up at Sandra. And Sandra looked back, and neither of them said anything, because there was no need to. The winter came. Brenda and Charlie moved into the small rental unit with Ernest full-time. Brenda got a job at the community college in the fall registration office, which she started in January. Charlie started 3rd grade at the elementary school 4 blocks from the rental. He walked to school with 2 other kids from the block on cold mornings, all of them in puffy jackets, all of them talking about the same television show. On weekends, he came out to Ridge Road with his mother, and he sat in the workshop with Dean, and he hammered pieces of pine into shapes. Ernest did his physical therapy without complaining, which surprised him. He got most of the grip strength back in his left hand by Christmas. He did not, in the end, ever get all of it. He did not need all of it either. He was, by January, driving his own truck again, slowly, on roads that he knew. He did not drive on Route 11. Sandra kept running. She ran on the pasture behind the house all through October and November. In December, on a cold, still morning, without telling Dean where she was going, she drove out to mile marker 84 on Route 11 and parked her truck on the shoulder in the same spot. She got Pepper and Biscuit out of the back seat. She stood there for a long time in the frozen weeds, looking down at the gravel. There was nothing there. It was just a shoulder. The fog that morning was thinner than it had been that day. She could see the maples on the far side of the road. She could hear one crow somewhere, calling to another crow. Pepper sat down at her left knee. Biscuit sat down at her right knee. They did not bark. They did not look up at her. They looked down the road, both of them, in the direction of the fog, exactly the way they had looked that morning in April. Sandra put a hand on each of their heads. "You knew," she said quietly. "I didn't. You did." Pepper turned his head and licked the back of her hand once, and then went back to watching the road. She stood there for another minute or two. Then she took a slow breath and clipped their leashes back on and put them into the truck. She drove home the long way, through town, past the little rental unit, where a light was on in the kitchen window, and where, if she had wanted to, she could have seen a boy standing on a step stool at the counter next to his grandfather, kneading dough for a loaf of bread that Ernest had promised him they were going to bake together on a Saturday morning at the very end of the year. Some stories end in a courtroom, some end in a hospital. This one ended quietly at a kitchen counter on a bright, cold morning, with the smell of yeast in the air and a boy's small hands pressing into flour, and a big brown dog asleep on the tile by his feet, and a woman on the shoulder of a road 4 miles away, leaning down to whisper thank you to 2 animals who had, on a grey morning in April, decided that a stranger in a truck was worth stopping for. Because sometimes the loudest voices in the world are the ones with no words at all. Sometimes the ones who save a life are not the ones you would expect. And sometimes, if you are lucky, you get to be the one who is listening on the morning it happens. If this story reached you tonight, wherever you are, take a moment before you scroll away. Leave a comment. Tell somebody about a dog you knew once, or a stranger who stopped for you, or a small kindness that turned into the whole shape of a life. Like this video so it finds another quiet listener, and subscribe to this channel so the next story finds you the moment it is ready. Take care of the small people. Take care of the animals who love them, and never ignore the ones who are trying, in the only voice they have, to tell you that something is wrong.